What's the worst thing you've seen at work? Story number 1. I once provided care for a man with dementia that often led to him being paranoid. His brother, an ex-police officer, was stealing from him. He would pick up his pension but steal about 10 to 20% of it each time. When the gentleman I cared for called his brother out on it, his brother would always blame his dementia for his suspicions and then guilt-trip him into apologizing for doubting him. Eventually, we were asked to collect his pension instead of his brother after his brother refused to provide a full paper trail of his pension and to deliver the money in the sealed envelope. It's given in at the office. His brother kicked off big time trying to get us to stop providing care so he could keep exploiting him. We stood our ground, duty of care above all else, and our man got the pension he earned through his life in full. I saw lots of other messed up stuff in that job, but there's something about a man's older brother exploiting and emotionally gaslighting him which just hits hard. Story number 2. Worked in search and rescue almost 10 years ago. We entered a building in an area that had been recently shelled quite heavily, and it was in rough shape. The apartments on the lower levels had been completely shredded, and while the upstairs apartments looked okay on the inside, there were huge cracks in the walls and floors of the building, and everything you touched or stepped on erupted in a cloud of dust. Power was out, plumbing was shot to shit, with leaks all over the place. The people inside needed relocating somewhere safe. We could hear screaming from I think the 3rd floor, but as we moved upwards it was getting fainter and fainter, gradually reducing into a kind of wailing, sobbing sound. We eventually find the apartment it's coming from, and on the other side of the door is a kid maybe 6 to 7 years old, crouched under a table, hands over his ears, and there is blood everywhere. It's on the floors, all over the tabletop, there's arcs of it spattered up the walls. We had no idea what to expect. Then we went around the corner into the kitchen and found the mother. She was slumped on the floor, still weakly sobbing, with both of her hands amputated on the floor next to her. She was trying to clutch her bleeding stumps in some bedsheets and an old towel. Her injuries were nothing to do with direct exposure to the conflict. Her husband had allegedly caught her with evidence of infidelity, severed both of her hands in rage, and then fled the scene. He had been radicalized into local extremist groups, and as soon as the situation in the city turned truly ugly, he left her there to die. Story number 3. Trigger warning, ESSA. I saw the aftermath, so to speak. I was a CNA working in a large nursing home. I was filling in for a couple days on a floor I didn't usually work on. So I did my stuff to each patient on this floor. None of the patients could talk or move on their own. I cleaned up one elderly lady and noticed she didn't have pubic hair. Where I would normally expect to see it, it was missing around her actual genitals. I thought it was weird, and I also noticed her genital area was reddened. I figured she'd had some sort of issue, and that's why it didn't look right. About an hour later, the head nurse has me and other aides come into an office. She asks us if we noticed anything weird with any of the residents. One of the other CNAs said she noticed 2 different ladies had reddened genital areas. I was like, and I mentioned the patient I'd seen with it also. As you've probably guessed by now, a male CNA on the floor was patients, had to give a statement to police, and he was fired of course, but I don't know anything else, because I left to work at a facility closer to my home not long after this. Story number 4. Craned an old grain bin that was cemented into the concrete slab it was on. The bird shit, feathers, and carcasses made a firm floor about 2 feet deep. Inside were about 15 pigeons, who looked like they never seen the light of day. Some were too to fly, or too young. One was pink, like bald, and absolutely the offspring of multi-generational incest. They were all f***ed up. They couldn't get out because the only place to escape was the cap at the top, which is impossible for a bird to fly vertically through without messing up their flight on the roof sheets. I'm guessing they survived off of the grain left inside it and cannibalizing the dead. Most farmers, in my experience, air out the bins and leave ways for birds to escape before we show up to do work, but that was probably the nastiest farmyard I've been in. There were 7 other bins just like it in a row. Story number 5. Two incidents at two different Walmart grocery distribution centers. The first, I got to work when they were wheeling out an inventory control coworker of mine to an ambulance with blood everywhere. She had a forklift operator run through an intersection on the dry grocery side forks first and speared her leg with a fork up against the rack. She nearly died on the way to the hospital. The second was a banana room door that came down fast for the lifts to go through, or an employee to walk in, came down and sliced the nose off a quality control employee, resulting in an investigation that showed the doors company-wide were installed incorrectly. Story number 6. A guy at my old job got fired and asked if he could sit in my truck while he waited for a ride. I said yes because we were work friends. Well, his ride showed up and was waiting for him for like 15 minutes. So I went to my truck to see what he was doing. I opened the door to see him passed out with a needle in his arm. He came to and was very ashamed that he was shooting up in my truck. I honestly just felt bad for him. He was previously a recovering addict, but relapse got the better of him. I hope he's doing better now. Story number 7. I worked at a Goodwill for a few years. We had lots of drug addicts trying to shoot up in the changing room and had an occasional OD. But the most shocking thing I experienced was the amount of times people physically threatened or attacked me or my coworkers when we refused their donations. Getting in our faces and trying to push us around. One guy tried to hit someone with a car, another one threw a picture frame that narrowly missed smashing my supervisor's head. Another threw such a temper tantrum that he smashed an entire set of chairs and a kitchen table. There was also someone who called the police because we changed the prices on softcover books. Story number 8. A guy knew he was getting fired, so he took a shit in the trash can in his cubicle. Nobody knew if he did it there or took it into the bathroom to shit in it, but he did it one way or another. He got called up to HR and was let go. Then the people working in his area started complaining about the shit smell, and sure enough, I found it in his little trash can. Then I called him to ask about it, and he said it was an old burrito he forgot to throw out. It was not an old burrito he forgot to throw out. Story number 9. I was a head lifeguard instructor. The worst was probably a 15-year-old boy that dove of the diving board cracked his head open on the bottom of the pool, blood gushing, and was unconscious. My coworker and I had to do a deep water spinal rescue, which is basically the hardest rescue at a pool. The kid not only survived but became a fellow lifeguard himself the next summer.